quotes and references. But in the part where it says Old Testament, for example, King Solomon, who was an actual historical figure, reigned. He was the son of David, if you recall. And he and David were the only two that were kings over both Judah and Israel. He reigned from 961 to 922 BC. But yet, the biblical accounts given of him are contained in 1 Kings in the Old. That's the name of the book there in the Old Testament, which was not written until between 621 and 597 BC. So roughly 300 years passed before that got written down. You know, the New Testament, like I said, Paul's first letter to the Thessalonians is believed to be the earliest, around the year 47. His other letters written through the 50s and 60s, himself dying, is believed in the year 67. Okay? Now the Gospels, maybe I shouldn't even assume this, I don't know. When I say, this is the New Testament, when I say the Gospels, you do know what that is? Correct. Okay. The New Testament, there's 27 books in the New Testament, 13 of which are letters of Paul, St. Paul. As the church was rapidly growing, it was springing up in places like Ephesus and Corinth and Colossae and Philippi, etc. And so he's traveling around a lot, but he catches wind of stuff that's going on when he's not there. So he writes these letters to them to encourage them or correct them and different reasons. So when it says Paul's letter to the Ephesians, what that means is he's writing to the church at Ephesus. This is the name of the place. Or there's two letters to the Corinthians. That's the church at Corinth. Okay? So there's 13 of those. There are other letters, like the letter of James, 2 letters of Peter, meaning St. Peter, and James the Apostle. There are 3 letters of John, meaning John the Apostle. There are other, there's a letter to the Hebrews, which they used to think Paul wrote that, but the common idea is that he probably didn't actually write that one. There's the book of Revelation, and then there are the 4 Gospels. Okay? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Okay? Who wrote them? Let's just take one for example. The Gospel of Matthew. There's an apostle named Matthew, right? Okay. So, was it a case where Matthew the apostle, as he's going around with Jesus and the other apostles, he's got his little papyrus and his little ink quill, and he's saying, okay, we're going to get this down. Wow. He just healed that guy. Man, I'm going to get that. Okay? He said, wow, he said that? Okay, we'll get that. Is that how it came to be? Probably not. You know, Matthew was long dead by the time the Gospel of Matthew was written. The Gospel of Matthew is believed to be written somewhere in the years 80 to 85 A.D. Well, Matthew was long dead by that point. So why is it the Gospel of Matthew, for example? Well, because Matthew did hear those things, and he did receive those things. And he then went out, as Jesus commanded the apostles to do, when he, right before he ascended back to heaven, said, "Go out and baptize all nations, in the name of the Father and Son and Holy Spirit." And so that's what they did. And so he spread the good news, the gospel, to people. And they heard that, and they received the gospel message from Matthew, and then they in turn passed it on to some others who received it, and then those people passed it on to some others who received it. But the origin of it was Matthew, wasn't it? So by the time it got written down, 80 to 85, it was the Gospel of Matthew, because that its origin was probably in Matthew. John, another apostle, origin probably in John. His was even later. That didn't get written down until about year somewhere 90 to 100. Luke was not an apostle. He was a physician, actually, but he was a disciple. And his was written about the same time as Matthew. Mark was not an apostle. It's believed that that is John Mark, who accompanied Paul on some of his missionary journeys. And that was the earliest gospel written around the year 70, 69 or 70. Okay? That's where Scripture comes from. And the Old Testament's the same, except there's 46 books, at least in the Catholic version, of the Old Testament. And of course that happened over a much longer period of time. Okay? Now, questions so far? Or need a clarification?
The Old Testament, it's more like, I mean, that's where like the plagues and all that stuff, like, so it's like the harsher times, I guess, of the Bible, or?
Well, yes and no, I guess. A lot of how things are expressed in the Old Testament comes out of the Hebrew worldview. Okay? So they tended to think God did everything. You still hear this stuff. I mean, it's not a hard thought to have. You know, so if there was a plague, they thought they were being punished. God was sending this plague on them because they had, wandered from the faith or sinned. Okay? Even in the time of Jesus, they still believed that if a person suffered any kind of, whether it was a physical affliction or any other kind of affliction, that it was because either they sinned or their parents sinned. So it's really more to do with the world with the world view that they have. Okay, it's how they're expressing their understanding and relationship with God. Okay, does that answer it?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good segue actually, but before I go to that part, we hear sometimes, as I said, in the 4th century, the church had all these writings that they were aware of. Okay? And incidentally, they were also aware of what you sometimes hear is the lost or Gnostic Gospels, like the Gospel of Thomas, and the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, and the Gospel of Peter, etc., etc., etc. They were aware of every single one of those writings. And and they purposely excluded them from the Bible on purpose. And they excluded them basically because they did not believe them to be the inspired Word of God. So if it was a gospel, for example, one of the things they looked for does it even have the death and resurrection of Jesus in it? Now, I've read the Gospel of Thomas. It ain't in there. It's not in there. So that was one criteria. Another criteria was they looked for, well, let's say that. There were certain things, there were certain misguided beliefs that popped up, okay? It's what a heresy is. Someone stubbornly persists in a wrong theological belief, okay? And there was some going around, and there was a really big one that was rather pervasive, called Gnosticism, okay? All that meant comes from the Greek word gnosis, which means knowledge, okay? And so it was a kind of a whole bunch of collection of beliefs, really. But the reason it got called Gnosticism was because they believed, these people that went by it, that they had the special knowledge, see? And so we're going to be saved because we're in, we got knowledge. You other poor suckers, you don't have the knowledge, you're going to hell. You're lost. You better come on in here. Well, that's not so weird, is it? I mean, we still hear that kind of stuff, don't we? I mean, people still say stuff like that, don't they? Believe this, or you're going to hell. People still say that. So that was Gnosticism. Well, that tainted many of those writings. And they knew that. And so they looked for it. And there it is. They got Gnosticism all through it. It's a lot of faulty theology in that thing. And I think that's part of the Word of God. So they excluded it. Okay? On purpose. So they had all these scrolls, these writings, all the Jewish scripture, Hebrew scripture, 46, what we came to know as books, 27 in the New Testament. Now, question that often arises, and I'll say this, it's at the bottom of the first page here actually. The books that are included in the Bible is sometimes referred to as the canon. Okay, and that's a word, it just means the measure. Measure. And so I guess you could say if they measured up, so to speak, they believed them to be the divine inspired writing, then they included them in the canon. Okay. Now, sometimes people say, well, my Bible doesn't have 46 books in the Old Testament. My Bible's only got 39. Okay? That would be a Protestant version of the Bible. Here's what happened. That's why it's different. Certainly by the 1st century AD, there were, the Hebrews kind of had their own canon. There were certain writings they accepted, for centuries before the time of Jesus. They accepted certain writings that they believed to be authentic and of God, and others that existed that they thought, that didn't come from God. So they were already doing that kind of stuff. Well, by the 1st century AD, there were 2 commonly accepted canons, writings, okay? One of them included 7 writings that the other did not.